the flight. The parameters of the booster are nominal. Everything is fine on board. For the second, the vehicle is stable. Everything is good on board.
Continuing to hear good performance calls. A quick look inside the capsule. You can see crew strapped in.
We are here for the Road Safety World Series. The hotel that we are staying in is a
minute mark into flight.
The short and roll are nominal. 70 seconds into the flight. Everything is nominal. We are good on board.
At this point, the space station has already flown over the Baikonur Cosmodrome and now making its way in front of the Soyuz spacecraft.
It's feeling well.
Seconds into flight, the Soyuz rocket already moving more than 2,100 miles per hour, already about 10 miles downrange.
Flight parameters of the booster are nominal. The crew is feeling well, except for the core unintelligible. Okay, if you received the message about the visual parameters, copy.
And right on time, we see first stage separation, the Koryoff cross, those four strap-on boosters separating. Now the single core stage continuing to power the Soyuz spacecraft into flight.
Copy.
Just before that, the launch escape tower was also jettisoned. Soyuz does maintain escape capability all the way to flight, though. This stage able to use for a short time, small boosters on the shroud itself, and then once the shroud detaches, we'll use boosters on the spacecraft.
So the shroud jettison is confirmed. We have controlled descent.
So we heard confirmation the launch shroud has jettisoned. In this animation, you can see the Soyuz spacecraft now exposed, continuing under the power of the second stage.
180 seconds into the flight, vehicle stabilization is performing nominally and the crew is feeling well. Copy.
Second stage is going to continue to fire until 4 minutes and 37 seconds into flight, so about another minute and 20 seconds.
The second stage thrusters are functioning nominally. Everything is good on board.
Spacecraft itself as it continues downrange.
230 seconds, vehicle stabilization is performing nominally. Everything is good on board.
At this point, the vehicle's already accelerated to just about 6,400 miles per hour, 172 miles downrange from the Baikonur Cosmodrome.
So 150 seconds into the flight, pitch, yaw and roll are nominal. Everything is good on board.
Pitch, yaw, and roll calls relating to the attitude or which way the vehicle's pointing. Hearing nominal is what we want to continue to hear on the way uphill. We're continuing to perform normally with the Soyuz spacecraft and the rocket. 4 minutes and 40 seconds into flight.
Second stage separation is confirmed.
So we heard good confirmation. Second stage is shut down and separated. You saw a piece fly off there. That was the lower skirt of the third stage. That was jettisoned right on time as it was supposed to.
Nominally, and everything is good on board.
Soyuz now being propelled by the single engine.
We are here for the Road Safety World Series. The hotel that we are staying in is a massive hotel. Thankfully, हमारे पास एक स्कूटर है चलाने के लिए. चलो.
Minutes and 46 seconds into flight.
Hey, come on. Where's your helmet?
flight. The third
course.
stage is functioning
Come on,
nominally.
let's get a helmet.
Everything is good on the board. Copy. Accept.
अरे
350 seconds into the flight. Everything is nominal. Everything is good on board. Good on board. Copy. Accept.
अरे
into the flight. Everything is nominal. 380 seconds into the flight. Third stage structures are functioning nominally. The crew are feeling well. Copy. Accept.
अरे
400 seconds into the flight. The vehicle is 350 seconds. Everything is good on board. Everything is nominal.
Now just about 2 minutes left, a little under 2 minutes. Power on the third stage. Once it shuts down and separates just a few seconds later, the Soyuz spacecraft will be flying free. And a series of pre-programmed commands will execute, deploying a number of the appendages, the antennas, the solar arrays needed to power the spacecraft on its way to the station. A number of antennas will also deploy for communication and tracking. Looking those that will be responsible for communicating with the station as the Soyuz makes an automated rendezvous and dock. 7.5 minutes since launch. We have about a minute 20, a minute 30 left until the third stage has done its job. Shut down and separate. Power the spacecraft on its way to the station. A number of antennas will also deploy for communication and tracking. Those that will be responsible for communicating with the station as the Soyuz makes an automated rendezvous and dock.
170 seconds. The stage structures are functioning nominally.
Now in the final minute, powered flight Soyuz 2.18 booster. Coming up soon, we'll see third stage shutdown, separation.
90 seconds to the flight. Vehicle stabilization is running nominally and everything is good on board.
We'll look to confirm good orbital insertion, essentially confirming that the spacecraft is in the intended altitude, the intended orbit. Now standing by for third stage separation, shutdown and separation.
520 seconds to the flight.
Good orbital insertion, essentially confirming that the spacecraft is in the intended altitude.
That's safety. Object insertion is confirmed. Our congratulations, and now from Moscow, and Moscow will talk to you. Kasbeki Moscow.
अरे wait, I'll just go and see what's there.
Kasbeki Moscow. Kasbeki.
Hello guys, good morning everyone. So remember the view now.
So we saw good shutdown and separation of the third stage. The solar array has deployed, standing by for confirmation that all antennas have deployed.
I'll just go and see what's there.
We are here for the Road Safety World Series. The hotel that we are staying in is a massive hotel. Thankfully, हमारे पास ये स्कूटर है चलाने के लिए. चलो.
Shutdown and separation of the third stage.
I am ready to provide the data as per page 26 Kasbeki. How was the Moscow? How did you copy? I copy loud and clear. How do you copy us? We copy you 555. I am ready to give the data as per stage 26. Yes, we are standing by for the first measurement. I am the data from you. So we are receiving data right now.
Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft and the Russian Mission Control Center in Koryov. Again, the crew safely on orbit. The Soyuz spacecraft deployed all of its solar arrays and antennas following a flawless flight uphill. We do have a little bit of time. We should be getting some launch replays pretty soon. So in the meantime, we'll take some more Ask NASA questions. This first one's asking how long are these astronauts going to stay on board the International Space Station? Well, most flights typically last about 6 months. As of right now, these three currently plan to stay about 6 months, a little more than 6 months on board the International Space Station. And that's a typical stay. The spacecraft itself has on the orbit lifetime of about 200 days. So that's typically a max that a crew will stay on board the International Space Station. Obviously, you have the capability to sometimes swap seats, depending on how the flight's downhill or down the schedule will take place. But for right now, these crew members are scheduled to spend about 6 months on board the station. This next question asks, why does the Dragon journey take more time than the Soyuz? It's a great question, and a lot of it comes down to the difficulties that come with orbital mechanics. You have to launch at very precise times to make journeys like the one we're seeing today, and it's only been possible through years of evolution and a lot of lessons learned on behalf of the Russian rocket scientists and the flight planners. Typically, for many years, the Soyuz took about 2 days to arrive at the International Space Station, and if they have any issues with any of their burns or their engine firings on the way to the space station today, they would default into what is a 34-orbit rendezvous, which takes about 2 days to get there. So it really just comes down to really understanding the capabilities of the spacecraft. Once you get that, you can try to narrow down. There are also a lot of other things that come into play when you plot out how long it's going to take you to get there. Typically, the shortest that a Dragon spacecraft will be able to make it to the space station is going to be about 6 to 8 hours right now. But again, has to be at a very specific time to the space station at a very specific place. And if it's any longer than that, we'll typically extend that out just to make sure that the crew has time to sleep, and we're not trying to keep them up for 12 to 14 hours straight before they try to dock the spacecraft to the space station. All right, this next one asks, how do you make oxygen on the space station? It's a great question. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, that we're able to recycle a lot of the life support systems. We make oxygen through a process called electrolysis, and that's where you basically take a water molecule and you split it. You use electricity, you separate it into its parts. Water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, H2O. And you can either take that excess hydrogen and vent it off board, or you can put it through a different process. We have a technology demonstration on board called Sabatier, which takes the excess hydrogen from when we make oxygen by separating the water molecules, and you combine it with CO2, carbon dioxide that gets scrubbed out of the air that the astronauts are exhaling. And if you take that excess hydrogen and you combine it with CO2, you can make more H2O. So the goal is to eventually get to a point where you have what's called a closed-loop life support system, where you're able to just kind of constantly cycle through all of your breathing gases, all of your water that you're launching, so you don't have to launch a bunch of reserves. We're still perfecting a lot of those technologies. It's really why the International Space Station is so important, because we can do that just 250 miles above our heads and really make sure that we understand those technologies very well before we start sending crew members to the moon, eventually onto Mars, where when you're going to Mars, you're talking about a 3-year round trip, and you have to make absolutely sure that all of those systems are going to work. Our next question asks, which docking port on the space station are they going to dock to? They are headed for the Roscosmos module. It's also known as Research Module number 1. It's on the Earth-facing side of the Zarya functional cargo block module on the Russian segment. It's the only one open on the space station right now. You can see what it's going to look like a little bit later this morning. Soyuz MS-18 with the arrow there. It's not there yet, but that's what it's going to look like, and it's the Roscosmos port that you can see attached to. Shane, how fast are they traveling roughly right now? So right now they're traveling at about 17,000 miles an hour, a little bit over, but they're essentially going orbital velocity. So at the altitude they're at, they'll start out at about 16,700 miles an hour or so, and then they'll continue to increase their speed through a series of what's called delta velocity burns. By increasing their speed, they're able to raise their orbit until they're roughly on the exact same orbital height and trajectory as the International Space Station, which itself is about 260 miles over the Earth right now. By that point, they'll be traveling closer to about 17,500 miles an hour. Our next question is, who will be the next ISS commander? Who's the next space station commander? This is a great question. So right now, on board the space station is Sergei Ryzhikov. He's actually going to hand off command to Shannon Walker, one of the Crew 1 astronauts, just about a week from now, just before he comes home, along with Sergei Kushverkov and Kate Rubins. So he's going to be handing off to Shannon Walker. She's on the right side of this picture in the front row, and she'll be the commander for a couple of days until the Crew 2 mission launches to the space station, at which point she will be handing off to Aki Hoshide in the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and he'll be the commander for several months during Expedition 65. And then towards the end of that flight, they'll hand off to Mark Vande Hei at the European Space Agency, who will be the commander for a couple of weeks at the very end of their mission. Alright, our next question asks, why do Russian rockets launch from Kazakhstan? That's a great question, and it goes back to the very beginning of the Russian space program, the very early days. The space program was starting up. I'm going to cut that off, and we are going to some launch replays now. Taking place right on time, 7:42 and 41 seconds GMT, 12:42 and 41 seconds. We have three planes coming to you this morning.
bus ಅದು ಊಟ ಆಡ್ರ ಅದು ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುன்னாடி 5:20 5:20 கூட வந்துருவாங்க அவங்க போதுக்கு வரவங்க ஹலோ கிளம்பிட்டீங்களா அதான் நான் நம்பிச்சிட்டேன் பர்றா எந்த ட்ரைவர் சொன்னீங்க மீன் எங்க திருச்சில வரேன் சரி சரி திருச்சில அங்க மணிலே இருக்கு சரி நான் அனுப்பிச்சுறேன் மணாப்புரம் புக் பண்ணி மணாப்புரம் அது பக்கம் 7 கிலோமீட்டர் பக்கம் மெயின் ரோட்ல புக் பண்ணி மெயின் ரோடு இல்லையா அதனால ஸ்டாப் ஏதாவது இருக்கு தான் ஸ்டாப் என்ன சொன்னா இதாண்டா ஸ்டாப் பண்ணேன் அவனே ஏய் கேட்டுருக்கான் நான் இங்கேருந்து 7 கிலோமீட்டர் தான் சொல்லிச்சு போல ஓகே சொன்னேன் வேலை முடிச்சிட்டாங்க வேலை முடிச்சிட்டாங்க நாளைக்கு தான் 5 மணி பஸ் மணி 5:15
That was replay 2. Again, we're expecting 4 of these launch replays for you this morning. It was a very smooth 8-minute, 49-second ride uphill. All 3 stages performing as expected, delivering Soyuz to its initial orbit.
ஹலோ மாமா, நியூ ஹோட்டல் கண்ணப்பா எங்கன்னு கேளு. அதான் கிளம்பிட்டீங்களா ஆஃபீஸ்ல இருந்து? இல்லையா, ஆட்டோல போறீங்களா? சரி சரி, சீக்கிரம் போங்க. 20 நிமிஷம் நிற்கும் பஸ், ஒன்றும் இல்லை. இல்லைன்னா கால் பண்ணுவான் டிரைவர், எனக்கு கால் பண்ணுவான்.
ரெட் பஸ்ல
எனக்கு
கிரீன் பஸ்னா
நாற்பத்தஞ்சு 46 லாஸ்ட். நான் என் நம்பர் போட்டு விட்டேன். நான் நைட்டு 12:45 தான் எனக்கு கால் பண்ணுவோம். பெருங்குளத்தூர் வந்துச்சு யாரும். ஆமா
அப்படியா? நான் போட்டுருக்கேன். அது வரைக்கும் அந்த கூப்பிட்டு பஸ் ட்ராக்கிங் இருக்குங்க. அப்போலாம் வீட்டு கிளம்புனா போர்டு கிளம்பு
என்ன பேர் வேக்கப் கால் ஆக்கி விட்றாங்க. என்ன பேர் வேக்கப் கால் ஆக்கி விட்றாங்க.
எவ்வளோ டிஸ்கவுண்ட் கொடுக்கும்? எவ்வளோ பஸ்?
60 ரூபா ஜிஎஸ்டி போகிறாங்க போகிறாங்க.
முன்னாடி உட்காந்தெல்லாம் நல்லா தான் இருக்கு பஸ். பஸ் தான்
And 3 down, 1 more to go. Launch replay took place right on time. 7:42 and 41 seconds GMT, 12:42 and 41 seconds out there in Baikonur. Flawless ride to orbit. Crew continuing to orbit the Earth this time. Our 4th and final replay.
புது அம்மா மாதிரி.
All right, and so that was our final launch replay. We are going to bring a close to our launch coverage. At this time, the crew continuing their ride uphill. They're about 7 minutes away from their first major burn to start catching up with the International Space Station. As long as everything goes well with this and the following burns, we're looking at a docking just about 2 hours and 15 minutes from now. So run through our continuing coverage for you real quick. And so we'll go out there, we'll be back with docking coverage all of these times, Central U.S. time, 5:15 a.m. And we expect docking at about 6:07 a.m. Central time, 11:07 a.m. or 11:07 GMT. Following that, we'll have a video file with all of the best launch replays while we wait for the hatch opening. We'll come back live in the air at 7:30 a.m. Central. The hatch opening right around 8 a.m. Central time, and then we'll wrap up the day with one final video file giving you the highlights from everything, docking, hatch opening, everything that unfolded today, delivering crew members to the space station. So that'll do it for right now. Keep sending in those questions using the hashtag AskNASA. We'll get through a whole bunch more once we get to our rendezvous and docking show. I do want to thank you for tuning in, staying up late or waking up early to catch 3 crew members flying to the International Space Station. We'll be back in just a little while to show you docking live as we get ready to increase the population on station from 7 all the way up to 10. So a lot more exciting stuff still to come. One more time, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back in just a couple hours. This is Mission Control Houston.
And I have a feather in my right hand, a hammer. I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings?
At the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, where an American astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts are sitting atop the 160-foot-tall Soyuz booster, ready to launch about an hour from now, 2:42 a.m. Central Time, 7:42 GMT, 12:42 p.m. over in Baikonur. This is a live view of that Soyuz rocket on the Site 31 launch pad in Baikonur. This is the 3rd crewed launch on the upgraded Soyuz 2.1A booster. Made its first flight with the Soyuz spacecraft to the International Space Station in April just last year. Today, a team of launch controllers are watching over all systems aboard the rocket, which at this point is fully fueled and ready for launch. We haven't tracked any issues throughout the day, which began with fuel and oxidizer loading some hours ago. They just completed a leak check on the Soyuz spacecraft, and as we speak, the 3 crew members inside are going through leak checks on their SOCO launch entry suits. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. From the International Space Station Flight Control Room, this is Mission Control Houston. I'm Dan Hewitt. I'll be taking you throughout the Soyuz launch and its flight to the International Space Station later on this morning. Here inside the room, flight controllers are looking over the systems on board as they prepare for the arrival of 3 new crew members flying up on the Soyuz MS-18. The Soyuz population is going to be increasing from 7 to 10 for a few days with the addition of NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei, Russian cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov, and Russian cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Oleg Novitskiy. These 3 are about to begin their planned 2-orbit flight to the station with the docking scheduled a little more than 3 hours, about 3 hours and 25 minutes after launch at 6:07 a.m. Central Time, 11:07 GMT, 4:07 p.m. in Baikonur, where we have NASA and Roscosmos support teams and officials watching the events unfold. Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft is going to be docking with the Roscosmos module. It's on the nadir or the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment, just under the Zarya module. You can see in this graphic here, we're going to have 4 Russian vehicles attached to the station just a few hours from now. The Soyuz MS-18, one currently on the pad and bound for the station. And they're going to join the 7 current station residents on board, starting off with NASA astronaut Kate Rubins, Russian cosmonaut Sergei Sverdchikov, Russian cosmonaut and Soyuz commander Sergei Ryzhikov. They've been on board since they arrived in the Soyuz MS-17 last October. And also on board right now are the 4 SpaceX Dragon Crew 1 astronauts that have been on board the station since November. And that's 3 NASA astronauts, Shannon Walker, Victor Glover, and the Crew 1 commander Mike Hopkins. And they were joined by JAXA astronaut Soichi Noguchi. Shannon Walker is going to be taking over as the Expedition 65 station commander. The change command ceremony coming up on April 15th, a little over a day prior to Rubins, Kuchverkov, and Ryzhikov undocking from the station and returning to Earth aboard their Soyuz spacecraft. here in Houston. The team in Mission Control is going to be monitoring today's launch, getting updates on the flight from their Russian counterparts. Flight director Paul Kanya is going to be leading the teams for launch and through the first hours of the Soyuz flight. The Capcom right now is Andreas Mogensen, Andy Mogensen from the European Space Agency. During the Soyuz's climb to orbit, tracking and telemetry is downlinked to ground stations along the flight path, and all of it gets routed here to the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov, just outside of Moscow. We'll be seeing a lot of this room over the next couple of hours. And as we will be with you for the next couple of hours, if you have any questions about today's launch, the docking, the rendezvous, anything about the International Space Station that you want to ask us, hop on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA, and I'll do my best to get through as many of those as we can today. Today's launch is marking the second flight into space for NASA astronaut Mark Vande Hei. This is going to be the first for cosmonaut Pyotr Dubrov. He's on the right there. And then this is going to be the third space flight for the MS-18 commander and Russian cosmonaut Oleg Novitskiy. This expedition also going to be celebrating the anniversary of a very important milestone in human spaceflight history. He was the first. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to make that slow trek to the top end of a rocket, bound to hurl him into the heavens and into the distant frontier of space. It was a trip into the most unknown of unknowns. Technology still in its nascent stages, until this point developed in the throes of conflict, Yuri took to the skies, descending into orbit for 108 minutes of history. Then after hurtling back through the Earth's atmosphere, Yuri ejected from his space harbinger and parachuted down to the Kazakh steppe. At that moment, he was transformed into a hero for the Soviet Union, the forerunner for humankind's ventures into outer space. And though he was taken from us too soon, those that look to slip the bonds of gravity and reach beyond a terrestrial home will forever revere what he accomplished. For once again, Yuri was the first. The Expedition 65 cruise Soyuz launch is going to honor the anniversary of Gagarin's historic flight with a mission patch adorning the fairing of their launch vehicle. The design of the Soyuz MS-18 patch incorporates a banner depicting the years 1961 and 2021, flanking the number 60, symbolizing the 60th anniversary of human spaceflight. But right now on board Soyuz today is a NASA astronaut. He's making his second long-duration flight to the space station. So let's kick things off by learning a little bit more about Mark Vande Hei.
So, arriving at the space station, something I'll never forget is looking over my left shoulder out the window in the Soyuz, where it was either a view of the Earth or blackness of space. And then all of a sudden I could see a solar array. Getting chills even thinking about it right now. It was this beautiful gold, massive. I mean, you don't ever train and see a solar array at full scale here. And so there it was, and the Russian commander sitting to my right. I had to really pay close attention, and I was supposed to be too. But as soon as I saw those solar rays, I broke the silence and said, "Wow!" And he was like, "So yeah, I was definitely a rookie. I was excited." The freedom of motion inside of the space station is huge. And then working was busy. It was definitely very busy. I got up there when SpaceX Dragon spacecraft was docked, just because there's a lot of science that requires return and things have to be done in a very specific timeline. It was very fast-paced immediately. And the space station is very unique because on the space station, orbit is really a continuous freefall. And because of that, you can have some very unstable structures that might not be able to stay together if you're on the ground. They can stay together on the space station. Flames behave differently because combustion on the ground requires drawing in all these rich gases into the flame because the hot combustion gases go up and away. But there's no up and away on the space station. All directions are equal as far as that's concerned. So that behaves differently. There's all kinds of different phenomena that we can experiment with. That's why it's a wonderful laboratory. Many, many different experiments. Some of those experiments actually have to do with us as the test subjects, because we're trying to understand how to have people safely travel for longer and longer distances too. That's just a sub-part of all the science we're doing on the space station. Some people have talked about at some point in the expedition feeling like it's time to go home, but for me there was always another spacewalk or another vehicle capture that was coming up, so it always felt like suddenly I was going home. It was surprising. I'm Mark Vande Hei, and I'm a NASA astronaut.
And Mark is just one of the 3 flying into space today, so now let's dive in and meet our entire crew. Born in Virginia, then raised in New Jersey and Minnesota, Mark Vande Hei earned a Bachelor of Science in Physics from St. John's University and a Master of Science in Applied Physics from Stanford University. He was commissioned in the U.S. Army through the ROTC program and served as a combat engineer. In 1999, he became an assistant professor of physics at the United States Military Academy in West Point. Vande Hei reported to the Johnson Space Center in Houston in July 2006 to serve as a capsule communicator, or CAPCOM, in mission control. Selected in June 2009 as one of 9 members of the 20th NASA astronaut class, Vande Hei first launched to the space station aboard Soyuz MS-18 on September 13, 2017. Serving as a flight engineer during Expeditions 53 and 54, he conducted 4 spacewalks, spending a total of 26 hours and 42 minutes outside the space station. During his mission, the crew marked the beginning of the first long-term increase in crew size on the U.S. segment, enabling NASA to double the time dedicated to research and achieve a record-setting 100 hours of research in 1 week. So far, Vande Hei has logged a total of 168 days in space. Mark Vande Hei is a flight engineer for today's launch. He's seated to the right of the Soyuz commander, Roscosmos cosmonaut Oleg Novitskiy. Born in Cherven in the Minsk region of Belarusia, Oleg Novitskiy attended military pilot school and became certified as a pilot engineer. He went on to graduate from the Yuri Gagarin Air Force Academy and earned a master's degree in state and municipal administration from the Russian Presidential Academy of National Economy and Public Administration. Before becoming a cosmonaut, he was a qualified paratrooper instructor, a military diver, and a Class 2 military pilot with a total of 700 hours of flight time. Selected as a cosmonaut candidate in 2007, Novitskiy qualified as a test cosmonaut in 2009. His first space flight was as Soyuz TMA-06M commander and a flight engineer during Expeditions 33 and 34. His second flight to space was aboard Soyuz MS-18, where he served again as a Soyuz commander and a flight engineer for
in less than 24 hours from now, voting for the 4th phase of elections in West Bengal will kick start. It will be the halfway mark. But before that, the slogans, the drives, the taunts, they are escalating in full swing.
For 339 days in space. Oleg Novitskiy is serving as the Soyuz MS-18 commander and will serve aboard the International Space Station as an Expedition 65 flight engineer. Seated to his left is first-time flyer, Roscosmos cosmonaut Pyotr. Born in Khabarovsk, Russia, Pyotr Dubrov graduated from the School of Information Technologies and continued his studies at the Dubrov State Technical University, graduating with a specialty in software for computing machines and automated systems. Dubrov also studied and received his Master of Sports in Parachute Jumping. His early career included serving as a software engineer at the Dubrov Railways, at Dolphin Bank, and at Seaboss Development International. Beginning his cosmonaut training in 2012, Dubrov was certified as a test cosmonaut in July 2014. Assigned to his first space flight as a member of the Expedition 64-65 crew, he served as a flight engineer aboard Soyuz MS-18 and on the space station. And we're back now with a quick live look inside the capsule. You can see the setup is Novitskiy, and at the top of your screen, Pyotr Dubrov in the left seat today. And just a reminder, a little bit later in the program, we'll be taking your questions, so hop over to Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA, and keep sending those in. Continue on though, something you'll see inside the cabin before departing the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia.
Commander has infuriated West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. The TMC has said that the Prime Minister's comments are insulting towards women. In fact, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has accused the BJP and the Prime Minister of teasing her.
Cartoon hidden gap. Cartoon came out. And there are stories that puppy reaching at home for a kitten that is flying in space.
Here's a closer look at Gab, Russian animated series made from 1976 to 1982. Just in front of Andrew's chair, right in front of Oleg, and we'll see that once they separate to the third stage of the Soyuz rocket. The
Prime Minister has been unsparing in his attacks on West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee. But the one thing that has struck out in Narendra Modi's campaign style is the way he's taunting Didi.
Check in on Mark Vande Hei, Oleg, Novitskiy, and Pyotr Dubrov as they get ready to launch to the International Space Station. And right now we are 41 minutes and 30 seconds away. Launch is timed to take place at exactly 2:42 and 41 seconds Central, and 7:42 and 41 seconds GMT, 12:42 and 41 seconds over in Baikonur. And as I said, we're going to be answering some of your questions, so go ahead and
Prime Minister's Didi Didi box have heard the Trinamool Congress and claims that Prime Minister's comments insult not just Mamata Banerjee but all women.
कि जिस भाषा में या जिस भाषा का प्रयोग किया जा रहा है प्रधानमंत्री खुद प्रधानमंत्री पहले ये कहना वर्जित है कि उनके चेयर पर हम लोग सम्मान करते हैं इस शब्द को इस तरीके से प्रयोग करके दीदी का अपमान करना पश्चिम बंगाल के महिलाओं का अपमान
দিদি সম্মানজনক শব্দ আর দেশ থেকে যে যেখানে আসেন প্রধানমন্ত্রী পর্যন্ত আগে দিদি বলে ডাকছেন, আগেও ডেকেছেন, এখনও ডাকছেন। এখন ওনার যে মানসিক অবস্থা আর পার্টির অবস্থা তাতে এই ভালো কথাটাও খারাপ লাগছে।
Didi herself is not too pleased with the Prime Minister scoffing at her. Just days ago, she hit back, calling him out for teasing her.
To last for several months, and so more than enough on board to keep these 10 crew members going for a couple of days. And also we'll have plenty when we do the Crew 2, Crew 1 handover, where we'll bump all the way up to 11 on board for a couple of days. Our next question comes from Whitney, who said, silly question, but wanted to know how many flight suits.
Despite Didi's rebuke, the BJP is not backing off.
It's going to differ for the astronauts.
Their latest campaign song takes the tone a notch higher.
And I will tell you from personal experience, you do end up using a lot of those pockets. You also end up forgetting stuff in those pockets, only to find it several months later. Alright, and we'll see one more from Chrissy. Wanted to know what will the sleeping arrangements be on the station with 10 people. We get this question
need to respect and John's point to the Kala Hobe bandwagon. In fact, the Prime Minister gave his own spin to the slogan as well. He in fact declared that this time it will be Kala Shesh for the TMC.
Of the Columbus module. So with the extra 3, they do what's essentially called a camp out. They find space in the different modules where they'll set up a temporary spot where they can attach their sleeping bag to the wall, and they just kind of camp out there for a couple of days. Crew on board
Ever since the TMC youth leader penned it, rap number Kala Hobe has taken Bengal by a storm.
And this just our next one comes from Alejandro, wants to know how much gravity the astronaut
hit among the youth, it has become the unofficial anthem for the TMC.
Benign ride uphill, using it to challenge at a maximum on the way
while the BJP has questioned the song, claiming that it provokes violence, was quick to jump on the bandwagon, though with a twist.
On the way home, with the ride up, fuel boosters, power the whole way. And we'll go ahead and take one more. This one from Get Well With It. Wants to know, is the Soyuz rocket one-time use, or are there reusable parts? The rocket itself is a one-time use, it's an expendable. So all of these different rocket parts will either fall to the ground in the vast expanse of Kazakhstan, or in some of the cases like the very Everest one, burn up on re-entry in the Earth's atmosphere. Keep sending those questions. So now we're giving you some video here. This is from yesterday, where Russian Orthodox priests did the traditional blessing of the rocket.
So what exactly is the Kala Hobe phenomenon?
Well, this is done prior to every single flight, a blessing of the rocket, and then typically we'll do a blessing of some of the pad engineers and some of the other officials, and then moving over to give the media a quick blessing as well.
Pineapple வேணாம் வேணும்
வேணுமா
ஜோக் சொல்லவா மொத்தம் நான் டைம் நான் கத்துக்கிட்டு வந்தேன் ஒரு பையன் வந்து எக்ஸாம் ஹாலுக்கு போனானா ஆனா அவன் எக்ஸாம் எழுதாமே திருப்பி வந்துட்டானா ஏன் என்னவா இருக்கும் ஏன்னா அது ரிட்டன் எக்ஸாம்
ஒண்ணுமே தெரியலையே
ரிட்டன் எக்ஸாம்
அப்படின்னா
என்னப்பா இப்படி இருக்காரு சிம்பிள் கேட்
ஓ ரிட்டன் எக்ஸாம்
கஷ்டம்
தாத்தா அசிங்கப்படுறதுனா வாழ்க்கையில
இதெல்லாம் பழைய ஜோக்குமா சத்தியமா
என்ன பழைய ஜோக்குனா நீங்க பழைய ஆளுங்க
ஆமா அது நீ கேட்ட ஆளு வந்து சவுண்ட் ஸ்கிட்
வயசா இருந்தாலும் புது ஆளுங்க அண்ணே போட்டேன் ஜோக்கு இவர்கிட்ட ரிட்டன் எக்ஸாம் புரியல
எல்கேஜி ஜோக்கு பாரு
எல்கேஜி ஜோக்கு புரியல
எக்ஸாமுக்கு போனா போன உடனே திரும்பிட்டான் ஏன்னா ரிட்டன் எக்ஸாம்
அண்ணா நான் சொல்லிட்டேன் அவருக்கு புரியல திருப்பி வரலையா
ஆபீஸுக்கு அவன் வந்து லஞ்ச் எடுக்கல டூலர் எடுக்கல ஆனா படுத்து இந்த பாய் எடுத்துட்டு போயிருக்கான்
ஓகே 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 பையன் வந்து ஆபீஸ்க்கு போனானா அந்த ஆபீஸ்ல வந்து எதுவுமே எடுக்காம பாய மட்டும் எடுத்துட்டு போனாங்க ஏன்னா அவன் ஆபீஸ் பாய் ஒரு பையன் ஆபீஸுக்கு போனானா எதுவுமே எடுக்காம வெறும் பாய மட்டும் எடுத்தாங்க ஏன்னா அவன் ஆபீஸ் பாய்
எங்க காமெடி போறீங்க எங்கிட்டு போகுது இந்த மாதிரி சிரிச்சுதான் ஒரு பெரிய வியாபாரம் கூப்பிடுறாங்க எங்கிட்டு போகுது
வாழ்க்கையில கேட்டதே இல்லை
எங்க காமெடி போறீங்க எங்கிட்டு போகுது எங்கிட்டயா போகுது இந்த மாதிரி சிரிச்சுதான் ஒரு பெரிய வியாபாரம் கூப்பிடுறாங்க வியாபாரம் ஒருத்தி வந்து வாழல வியாபாரம் ஒருத்தி வாழக்கான் ஏன் வாழல இவன் வந்து வாழல அப்படின்றா தங்கச்சி வந்து வாழக்கா போய் மச்சான் எல்லாம் நல்லா இருக்கு
அருள் வாக்கு ட்ரெண்டிங்ல உள்ள வாக்கு அப்படியா நாளை முடிச்சிருவோம் என்ன வாக்குனா செல்வாக்கு
Building 254 or the Suit Up and Integration Building. Cosmonaut Hotel on the very edge of the town of Baikonur. Just
இங்கிலீஷ்ல இருக்கிற எல்லா லெட்டரும் ஒரே இடத்துல இருக்கணும்னா அது எந்த இடம்?
டிக்ஷனரியா?
நீங்க அறிவு யூஸ் பண்ணிட்டீங்க.
நான் குத்தவே இல்ல. போஸ்ட் பாக்ஸா?
ஆமா. போஸ்ட் பாக்ஸ்ல தான எல்லா லெட்டரும் இருக்கும்.
அதை விட பெட்டரான ஆன்சர் கொடுத்தனா?
இல்ல நீங்க அறிவாளியா ஆன்சர் கொடுத்தீங்க.
அதான் நமக்கு.
பைனாப்பிள் வேணாம்.
வேணாமா?
வேணும்.
வேணுமா?
சாப்பிடு. சரி நான் உங்களுக்கு ஒரு
எதுக்கு இதை விட்டு தனியாக வச்சிருக்கீங்க?
நீங்களும் ஃபார்முலா
எதுக்கு இதை விட்டு தனியாக வச்சிருக்கீங்க?
நீங்களும் ஃபார்முலா ஆரம்பிச்சீங்க.
நான் விடலாமாண்ணே அங்கே குதிக்கலாண்ணே.
விட்டு நம்ம தான் குதிக்கணுமா?
நான் விட்டுட்டேன், நான் குதிக்க போறேன்.
நான் ஒரு ஆனந்தம். ஐயோ ரெண்டு
நீங்க தான் என் ஹார்ட்ல ரைட் பண்ண ரைட்டர்.
புகழ கத்துக்கிட்டு வாங்க போ. நான் புகழ நான் கூட குச்சி மாட்டி நம்ம ரெண்டு பேரும் அப்படி குதிக்கலாம்.
ஆனா உன்கிட்ட ஏதோ ஒன்னு இருக்குடா.
வேற லெவல்ல என்னங்க?
GRBD மற்றும் APL குச்சினி வழங்கும் குக் வித் குமாரி பவர் பாய் டாஸ் வித் இட்டானா மீட் அண்ட் ஈட்.
Very quick. About 3 hours, 25 minutes. Now.
குதிங்க நான் பாத்துக்கிறேன்.
Entry suits are primarily worn if you're familiar with a lot of the different space vehicles. You're wearing these suits during the ride, and they're there to protect you in the event of what's called a cavity pressurization. If for whatever reason the spacecraft were to lose the integrity of its hull, the cabin were to go down the vacuum, these suits are connected to protect the crew in the event that something like that happens. And that's why we have to wear these around all this what we call the dynamic bases. Anytime you're running, docking, undocking, and then coming home, remember to
புகழுக்கு என்னைக்குமே நான் தான் தாய்.
GRBD மற்றும் APL குச்சினி வழங்கும் குக் வித் குமாரி பவர் பாய் டாஸ் வித் இட்டானா மீட் அண்ட் ஈட் ஃபேமிலி ரெஸ்டாரன்ட் ஹட்சன் கர் மற்றும்
இது பாத்தீங்கன்னா ஸ்பெஷல் இருக்கு. இது சூப்பரா இருக்கு. இது டைம் இத போய் இதுல போட்டு இது லூஸ். அது கூட இதுதான் டைம். இது டைம். இது மணி கட்.
இங்க இருந்தா இந்த மாதிரி
இது என்னன்னா போட்டுங்க.
கேரட்.
என்னமா ஊங்கிட்டல மயிலுகிட்ட.
நான் ஒரு கோமாளில நான் மதிக்கவே மாட்டேன்றாங்க.
ஒட்டிக்குது.
ஐயோ. கமான் கேமரா கமான். தல என்னாச்சு? இங்க பாருங்க இந்த லேயர் நீங்க எங்க வைக்க சொன்னீங்க? அடியில வைக்க சொன்னீங்களா? எவ்வளவு அடியில வச்சிருக்காங்க?
GRBD மற்றும் APL குச்சினி வழங்கும் குக் வித் குமாரி சீசன் 2 பவர் பாய் டாஸ் வித் இட்டானா.
ஆலு பரோட்டா பாக்குறீ 2 உருளைக்கிழங்கு வேக வச்சு கொடுத்துறோம். அதுக்கு மேல உங்களுக்கு உருளைக்கிழங்கு வேணும்னா ஒரு வெங்காயத்தை எடுத்து ஃபுல்லா கடிச்சு சாப்பிட்டு 2 உருளைக்கிழங்கு எடுத்து போயிடலாம். இந்த டீம் அடிக்கிற நீ எனக்கு எல்லாம் என்ன பண்ண அதான் நானும் கேக்குறேன்.
முடியுமா? சூடா இருக்கும்.
கைய உள்ள விட்டதுமா சொல்லுங்க சூடா இருக்கும்ட்டு.
நானும் பண்ணேன் நான். ஐயோ நீ படாதமா உனக்கு கெஞ்சி கேக்குறேன்.
பண்ணு ஒரு வாட் பண்ணு. ஏன் வாய் அப்படி ஆச்சுங்க? புகழ்லாம் என்ன போறாம்பா? ஓகே நீங்க எல்லாம் போலாம்.
GRBD மற்றும் APL குச்சினி வழங்கும் குக் வித் குமாரி சீசன் 2 பவர் பாய் டாஸ் வித் இட்டானா ஒயாலோ பீட்சா மற்றும் கார்டியா அட்வான்ஸ்டு நல்லெண்ணெய் சனிக்கிழமை மாலை 6:30க்கு உங்கள் விஜய் மற்றும் Disney+ Hotstarரில்.
There's a pane of glass to help maintain that strict quarantine. That's true for all crew members spending long duration flights on board. The last year,
டேபிள்ல மேல இப்ப பாத்தீங்கன்னா ஒரு கத்தி கூட இருக்காது. கையில பிடிச்சி இதை வச்சு அழுத்தி
negative effects of living in microgravity for a long time can actually suppress your immune system. And so we want to make sure crew members are as healthy as possible, not bringing any cold bugs or anything like that up there with them. So they're kept in a very strict quarantine. Access to the crew is extremely limited in this time. It's typically about the 2 weeks right before they lift off. This is the same for crew members flying on a Soyuz spacecraft. It's the same that we've been putting crew members for that have flown up on the SpaceX Dragon in the last, the Demo 2 and the Crew 1 flights.
எவ்வளோ சேர்த்தாலும் ஒரு நாள் கரைஞ்சிடும். இது மாஸ் ஒரு வாட்டி சேர்ந்துட்டா கரை.
ஏன்பா அந்த பொண்ணுங்களாம் காலு கீழே போற கருப்பம் வச்சு மெரிச்சிடறாங்க. கை கேட்ட முடியாத பட்டாம்பூச்சிக்கு தான் ஆசைப்படுறாங்க.
எப்படா ரெண்டு பூச்சி வச்சு இப்படி நான் சொல்றேன். தேங்க்யூ.
ஏன்பா அந்த பொண்ணுங்க
We're always here to support you if you need us. It's the most important thing to remember that.
ஏன்பா அந்த பொண்ணுங்களாம் காலு கீழே போற கருப்பம் வச்சு மெரிச்சிடறாங்க. கை
According to the evaluation of readiness for launch, the rocket and the boosters are in good technical condition. Everything is working nominally, and I wish you successful completion of your mission. I know you have done everything.
நான் உன்னை எங்க அம்மாவை பார்த்துக்கிற மாதிரி பார்த்துக்குவேன்.
And will continue talking to you via Mission Control Center. Your program will be a little bit more full than for previous. You will not be bored. Hopefully you will find some time to rest. And of course, continue supporting each other and stay good friends.
ரொம்ப வருஷமா பழக்கம். ஆக்சுவலா நம்ம சேனல்ல தான். ஓகே. நம்ம டான்ஸ் கிளாஸ் பிராக்டிஸ் பண்ணுவோம். சரி இந்த
speaking with Sergei Korsakov, cosmonaut who was assigned to the flight up until the swap for Mark Vande Hei. Also speaking to Dmitry Rogozin and Sergei Krikalev from Roscosmos, and Ken Bowersox and Joel Montalbano of NASA. After that, though, they were able to board their bus. That happened right at about 8:56 a.m. Friday morning in Baikonur for the ride out to Launch Pad 31. And Launch Pad 31 a little bit further away than Gagarin Start, where for years crews have launched from Baikonur to the International Space Station. It took them about 70 minutes to to get over to the pad. Again, in those SOFA launch and entry suits to make their way to the rocket and up the elevator for their ride to space. The crew climbing a small flight of stairs, getting set up, taking a few final photos, and waving goodbye to officials from Roscosmos and NASA gathered to see the crew members off before they head into the elevator and ride up to the top of the Soyuz rocket to board their capsule. This all took place about 2 hours ago, and since then the crew has been in their seats. Again, Oleg Novitskiy is in the center seat. He's the commander of the Soyuz spacecraft. Pyotr Dubrov in the left seat, Mark Vande Hei in the right. Since they've been on board, they've gone through a number of pre-launch checks, confirming good leak check on the Soyuz capsule itself, also doing leak checks on their suits, continuing to speak with the pad engineers and the launch teams down in Baikonur as they continue to count down towards launch. Back now, though, with a live view of that Soyuz, the MS-18 spacecraft, the Soyuz rocket on the launch pad in Baikonur. And if you're just now joining us, a reminder, liftoff is scheduled 2:42 a.m. Central Time. That's 7:42 GMT or 12:42 p.m. over in Baikonur. And as of right now, we are 22 minutes and 5 seconds away from that launch. And as we continue to count down, let's first explore the Soyuz spacecraft in a little bit more detail.
Spacecraft is 24.5 feet long with an overall volume of 177 cubic feet, comprised of 3 modules. The descent module, situated in the middle of the Soyuz vehicle, contains customized seats for the crew members during launch, entry, and landing, and contains all the controls and displays necessary for the flight. It also houses life support systems, batteries for the re-entry and landing, and the parachute and soft landing rocket engines that slow the Soyuz just before touchdown as the spacecraft lands in Kazakhstan. There are 8 hydrogen peroxide thrusters located on the module, which are used to control the spacecraft's orientation or attitude during the descent until parachute deployment. The descent module also contains a guidance, navigation, and control system used to maneuver the vehicle during the descent phase of the mission. This descent module is 7.3 feet long with a diameter of 7.1 feet and a habitable volume of 124 cubic feet. It is the only portion of the Soyuz that survives the return to Earth. The orbital module at the top is 9.8 feet long. It connects to the descent module via a pressurized hatch. This is where the crew has a small amount of room to move around following launch during the flight to the space station. It has a docking mechanism, hatch, and rendezvous antennas located at the front end. The docking mechanism is used to dock with the space station, and the hatch allows entry into the orbiting complex. The rendezvous antennas are used by the automated docking system, which uses radar, to maneuver toward the station for docking. There is also a forward-looking window in the module that the crew can use to take manual measurements of distance and closing speed with a laser rangefinder in the event of failure of the rendezvous radar system. The propulsion module houses the oxygen storage tanks, the main engine, and the attitude control thrusters, avionics, and communication and control equipment. The propulsion portion of this module handles all orbital maneuvers, including those needed for the rendezvous with the space station and the deorbit burn at the end of the spacecraft mission. Before you are deployed, the 2 solar arrays are bolted against the body of the propulsion module, which, along with the orbital module, separates from the descent module after the deorbit burn. The solar panels span almost 35 feet. The entire spacecraft serves not only as a crew transport vehicle to and from the space station, but also as an emergency return vehicle in the unlikely event that the crew needs to leave the station unexpectedly.
going through this Soyuz spacecraft in a little bit more detail as we continue to watch it fly up to the International Space Station. For now, though, let's take a couple of moments. If you have any questions about the launch or the flight today or anything about the space station, jump onto Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. We will try and knock out as many of these as we can this morning. So let's do a few more. This first one up from Tristan wanted to know what are the main things to look for in order to have a successful launch. It's a great question. So this is essentially a 3-stage flight to orbit today. The whole thing over in just under 9 minutes. We'll look for a couple of key events. I'll outline those for you real quick. So about 1 minute 54 seconds into flight, the launch escape tower will jettison. If you look at this view of the rocket, it's the very narrow part at the very top. That's in place to detach and pull the capsule away from the rocket in the event there's any issue on the way uphill. That will detach at 1 minute 54 seconds, and just 4 seconds later, the first stage will separate. Now, the first stage on the Soyuz spacecraft are 4 strap-on boosters on the very bottom. They're firing along with the second stage for about the first 2 minutes into flight. Shortly after that, about 30 seconds later, the launch shroud. So the white part of the rocket just below the launch escape tower, that will break off. That will unveil essentially the Soyuz spacecraft to the vacuum of space. That's there to protect it in the denser parts of Earth's atmosphere as the rocket climbs uphill. The second stage will shut down 4 minutes 37 seconds into flight, and then it will separate 4 minutes and 48 seconds. After that, the lower skirt of the third stage will jettison, and that will continue to fire until just before 9 minutes into flight. And so we're really looking for all of those different staging events to take place, and then we're going to look for what's called a good orbital insertion. That'll be the primary thing we want to hear at the very end of the ascent. All right, our next question comes from Brian, who wanted to know, will the launch be occurring at the time the space station passes over the launch site like it does from the Cape? It's a little bit different for this one, as it's timed extremely specifically in order for the Soyuz to make this kind of fast-track to-orbit rendezvous. At the time of the launch, the station will be about 259 miles over northern Uzbekistan. It will be about 335 miles behind the Soyuz as it leaves the launch pad. But then during that ascent, space station will actually leapfrog in front of the Soyuz during the climb to orbit. So when the Soyuz launches, the station will be a little bit behind it, but by the time the station will be a little bit in front of it. That's a great question, but it is timed specifically so they can make this quick to orbit, about 3 hour, 25 minute rendezvous. From Blockbuster wants to know, what is the docking in English time? I'm assuming you mean UTC or Greenwich Mean Time. That is a great question, and that's a pretty easy answer because that's the same time that we use on board the International Space Station. Docking today is scheduled to take place at 11:07 and 51 seconds GMT. It's the same time zone that they use on board the space station, and that we follow at all of the different flight control rooms around the world just to stay in sync. Our next question comes from Nick, who wanted to know which 3 Russian vehicles are already docked to the station. What is the station's maximum crew capacity during crew rotation? There are 3 other Russian spacecraft currently docked to the station. 2 of them are Progress or cargo spacecraft, and 1 is another crewed vehicle. We have the Progress 75 and 77 docked to the Earth-facing port on Zvezda, and also the very aft and very back part of the station. And the Soyuz MS-18, which carried Kate Rubins and her Russian cosmonaut colleagues up to the space station about 6 months ago, is already docked pretty soon at the Roscosmos module, or the mini research module number 1. About 2.5 hours, about 3.5 hours after launch, we'll have the Soyuz MS-18 spacecraft. The most we've had before when we were doing the handovers was about 9, and we're going to have 10 when we have 2 Soyuz spacecraft and the Crew 1 Dragon attached. We'll go up to 11, and that's expected to be about the max that we'll see for these crew handover periods in the future. That'll happen anytime we do what's called a direct handover, when a new crew launches and arrives at the International Space Station before another crew leaves. All right, our next question comes from Chris Davies. Wants to know, is there any plans to have a Russian join a Crew Dragon flight on the stage to return the favor for the many years of Americans on Soyuz? Great question, Chris. Absolutely is. It's fully our intention to fly what we call mixed crews, so having at least an American and a Russian on every spacecraft going to the International Space Station. The Russian cosmonauts receive much more extensive training and have a lot more expertise on the Russian segment, which is functionally 1/2 of the International Space Station. And the same is true for American astronauts in the U.S. segment. So to just put us in the best possible posture to continue operating the space station safely, just have really the best people always on hand for the job. We fully intend to see our Russian counterparts join us pretty soon on the U.S. commercial crew vehicles that are currently flying to the space station. Crew 1 currently docked. All right, let's do one more for right now. This one comes from Deanne, who